Ninja Theory released the recommended PC specs, and stupid expensive is what your PC will need to be if you want to run this on very high settings. They revealed this sheet where they say higher frame rates or resolutions can be achieved with the use of DLSS 3, FSR 3, or XESS 1.3. I don't think they specify 24 FPS cinematic. Who knows? I'm not sure if they say specifically what frame rate these are targeting. All they say is graphic presets, low, medium, high, or high at 4K. So I would imagine these are all targeting 30 FPS. I'm imagining. I think all of this is for 30 FPS. Because if it were 60, I think they would mention it. So with that said, low, to run it at low settings at 1080p, probably 30 FPS. You should be able to do that with a 1070, which a 1070 is what? Like 5, 6, maybe even 6 or 7 years old. That's an older card for sure. Intel Arc A580, I think that's a newer card, but it's a more budget one from Intel. 6 gigs of VRAM, 16 gigs of RAM recommended on the PC, 70 gig SSD, and Windows 10 or 11. It's 2016. Oh, really? Oh, it's even older than I thought. So with that, medium at 1080, they're recommending a 2070 or an Intel Arc A580. So there's a lot of range on the 580 apparently. And then recommended, which is high at 1440p, they're saying you're going to need a 3080, an RX 6800 XT, or an A770, 8 gigs of VRAM. Or if you want to run it on high at 4K, you need a 4080 or a 7900 XTX with 12 gigs of VRAM. Oh baby. Yeah, I fully expect these settings to be for 30 FPS. Everything we've heard is that the game is going to be one of the most visually impressive games to ever release, pretty much. But that requires power. That requires power. And so I fully expect that this is going to be a very heavy game to run. And that's why, I mean, they put right here, use of DLSS 3, FSR 3, or XESS 1.3. They are recommending in big letters that you use some sort of upscaling tech to achieve higher frame rates. And if they have it fully implemented and you can do stuff like frame generation, which I insist is still just magic. If you've never tried like DLSS with frame generation, it's straight up magic. It's ridiculous. Like it's stupid. You flip that switch and you're like, wait, my frames just doubled and it looks pretty much identical. It's outrageous. In Cyberpunk 2077, it's straight up like that. You're like, oh, this looks really good. Let me try turning this on. And then you just have twice the frames and you're like, what? Like, it's outrageous. It's outrageous. But with that said, the graph is not super clear. I mean, this guy, Dante, is asking, path tracing or hardware lumen use, did you put any special attention to the PC version for you to be worth our money? And I mean, they obviously have not responded to this. It's a little bit of a hostile question, honestly, at the outset. It's a little aggressive. I would imagine they're using lumen. I would imagine there's some element of ray tracing and stuff. I don't think you need path tracing to make it worth your money. If that's your standard, you're going to miss out on a lot of very good games. But beyond that, yeah, it's not clear if this is a 30 FPS or 60 FPS target, but I would bet good money it's 30. I would bet really good money it's 30. This guy says, according to Digital Foundry, Hellblade 2 runs at 964p to 1070p at 30 FPS on the Series X. Hellblade 2 is bound to create some divides as a result of these compromises. Hold on, should we pull this up? Where's the Digital Foundry video on this?
Performance of the captured footage appears to be generally fine. Now the footage that we have is encoded at exactly 30 Hz for some reason, not the 59.94 Hz that the Xbox Series consoles output by default. So it's possible that that process, either on the capture side or the encoding side, may have introduced some duplicate frames into the capture. And we do see a good number of duplicate frames throughout the footage, one-off little hitches that could be genuine performance-related drops or could be artifacts of that process. It's not possible to tell without properly captured and encoded footage, but there are no sustained performance drops here at least, which is a good sign. The only real concession in Hellblade 2, judging from this footage, comes down to the size and scope of the game. Hellblade 2 is a smaller title than a lot of its contemporaries, with a structure that seems a lot like the first game. Early trailers suggested something perhaps a bit broader might be in the cards, but more recent showings, including this preview footage, seem to show a game that is more tightly constrained, built around narrow passageways, linear paths, and one-on-one duels.
Yeah, I fully expected this game is going to be very similar to the first. I think it'll probably play like Hellblade 1.5. I don't really expect it to feel like a crazy leap. I think visually it'll be a leap, but I don't think it'll feel like that different, you know?
From the previews from other outlets, the final game may largely stick to this pattern, which would show some restraint relative to other popular single-player action titles. Of course, a lot of players will also take issue with the way the game has seemingly been configured on console platforms. This is a 30 FPS game, with no high frame rate options for console players, which is going to irk some gamers but is reasonable for a title with this level of visual accomplishment. The game's image quality, at least judging from this preview, is a little mixed, though I think expectations should probably be adjusted given the quality and character of the graphics on display. This is a narrative-focused, cinematic title, think The Order 1886, and isn't aiming for a super sharp, super clear image. On Series X, it's clearly a demanding game, but the results still look excellent overall, I'd say. It's lower power platforms, specifically the Series S, that I'm more curious about. The likely much lower internal resolutions on that system, plus any S-specific nips and tucks, could make the game a lot less visually satisfying. The game's configuration on Series X would also place this as one of the more demanding pieces of PC software we've seen so far this generation. It might take a pretty solid GPU to manage good image quality at high frame rates.
I mean, already we're saying that a 4080, that chart isn't very good, but that chart was suggesting that this could just be at 30, because they're saying higher frame rates can be achieved with DLSS 3 and blah, blah, blah. So if that's the case, and if these settings are recommended for 30, not even for 60, because I don't think that there's any way a 1070 is going to run it even at 1080p at 60, based on what we've heard about how heavy it is. So if that's the case, if this is targeting 30 and they're saying like a 4080 is needed to get it running at 30 frames at 4K, you're going to need to use one of these upscalers. Like, the chart's kept vague because in reality it's going to be a mess. I mean, they've spent so much time working on it. They really can't afford this to be a mess. I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful because they've been working very hard, and apparently it's only about 7 to 10 hours long. And if that's the case, like this thing needs to be one of the most polished games we've seen in the last handful of years. Like, if you're releasing something like that, it's got to be really, really polished. And to be clear, it's not $70. This is a $50 game. So they are selling it for less because it's going to be smaller. So this is not really an Order 1886 situation where they're coming out for like $70 and demanding it. Even though the game's really, really short, it seems like they actually are being upfront with the size and scope, but that is something to remember.
Presuming the CPU side of the equation is scalable enough. It's a lot like other high-end UE5 efforts we've seen so far in that respect. So I think Hellblade 2 is bound to create some divides as a result of these compromises, but I have to say that I have a lot of respect for Ninja Theory's creative talents and the immense visual accomplishment this title represents. In my book, this could be the very best looking Unreal Engine 5 title out there when it releases on May 21st, which is no small feat. But I think I've stretched out this preview footage far enough, so we'll have more on the game closer to release.
I don't know if he's done any pixel counting. Did they? Because granted, it's a capture, so it's not the same.
I got counts on geometry of around 1296p to 1440p or so, though when you factor in the letterboxing, it's more like 2304 by 964 to 2560 by 1070, or roughly in that range. However,
this is one thing people could easily take out of context, though, because people will hear like 1440p, and all of those impressions are based off of the standard 16:9 ratio. So if you hear, for example, 1080p, you're thinking of 1920 pixels horizontally by 1080 or 1080 pixels vertically, and that's what makes up the overall resolution of the image. With this game, everything is in this letterbox format, which is a little trick that even like the Order 1886 has used, because it means that you just shave off that section and you don't have to render those pixels, right? You get to render at a lower resolution. Easy peasy. It looks cinematic, and you don't have to render as much, so you can crank fidelity even higher in theory. But some people might take that out of context and be like, oh, see, they're only doing 964. Well, it's 964 in this little section. That doesn't count the black bars. So you just have to, MS Painter, it's fake. So you just have to, remember that. Like, it's all in the details. 964, I agree, sounds crazy for a 2024 title, but it also is shaving off these big black bars, and so that's it. Like, it wouldn't necessarily need to render at quite as high of a resolution. Without a doubt, though, this game's going to be super, super heavy. They're doing a lot of post-processing and stuff, so even if they're rendering at like native 4K on console, I think it would be post-processed to the point where you probably wouldn't even see the visual benefits of it. Because a lot of post-processing stuff blurs images or distorts it, color shifts it, does different lens filtering, all sorts of stuff. So you wouldn't necessarily directly benefit from higher resolutions sometimes, but it's, at the end of the day, it's going to be an extremely tough game to run. I don't think there's any question about that. I'm going to be doing a sort of skeptical look video breaking it down, because I find the whole story of Hellblade at this point to just be a little weird. And I'm saying that as a fan, like, of these games. I really want this to be amazing, but I find it weird that they've been very, very quiet on it. You know, very, very quiet. And this is the time when normally you would see like a lot of marketing, a lot of pushing, and instead we're getting like an occasional post from Ninja Theory, and that's about it from what I've been able to tell. And it's just a little strange. Now, Joel Raptor brought up a good point. He's like, Luke, they're not showing more of the game because the game's so short that if they show any more, it's just spoiling the game. So they're just not going to. And I think that that's honestly probably fair. I think that that's about right. But it doesn't mean I have to like it, you know, but I that very well could be the case. As for other things with it, like they said that they like totally reworked the combat system and stuff from the first game, because that was a complaint people had about the first game. And then we see the combat in more detail, and it just looks like the combat from the first game. Like it doesn't actually look very different at all. They're like, yeah, well, it's focused 1v1, like we're not going to throw multiple enemies at you. It's like, okay, but it looks like the same thing, you know. There's just something odd about it. My red flag detectors are going up, and the game might be amazing, and I really hope it is amazing, but there's just something about it. He took my thing.